Welcome everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to discuss a very interesting and a very different kind of a topic. I'm going to discuss one of the Upanishads, Isha Upanishads. Only three verses: verse 1, verse 9, and verse 9, 10, and 11. So only three verses of Isha Upanishad. Whatever I am going to tell you is in this book of mine, which is basically this book, Decoding Human Psyche. This is a book in which I have written a lot of things about how the human psyche works, and it's a very interesting book. And most of you who are interested in understanding yourselves and why people make choices, or why people believe what they believe, or why people do what they do, choose to do what they do. You want to understand the choices and why people act or behave the way they behave. If you want to become a leader and all this is a book for you. So in this book, while I was understanding the concepts in this book, I came across Isha Upanishad, especially verse 9, 10, and 11. And I found that this is a very interesting Upanishad. And these three verses are equally interesting. So you will understand why exactly I have chosen. I have a disclaimer to give here, that I am not a Vedacharya and I am not aware of all the Upanishads, and I am really not an expert in Upanishads actually. In fact, I know very few verses of very few Upanishads. I know the first verse of Isha Upanishad, and I know Maha Upanishad, one verse, and three verses of Isha Upanishad. That's it. So I'm not an expert in Hinduism or Vedas or Vedacharya. I have not read Vedas and all that. But I have read these verses, and I know what is the accepted meaning of these verses, and the concepts which are given in this book, Decoding Human Psyche, depend with those concepts. We can actually reinterpret these verses, and we can get much more wisdom. So I believe that if you listen patiently till the end of this video, you will get a lot of insight, and you will get a lot of wisdom which you will be able to utilize. So I think you stay on. So we'll jump into our topic. First of all, I'll just read what exactly is the Isha Upanishad. Actually, Isha Upanishad is one of the Upanishads. So Upanishads are basically texts of wisdom. They are ancient texts. Some of the Upanishads are parts of Vedas. So basically, these are part of Vedanta. So the basic knowledge which is given about who is me, or what is Brahma or Brahman, and so a lot of wisdom resides in these Upanishads, and ancient Vedic wisdom, which is still, even now, it's very useful. So those who are interested, it's a very interesting thing. Anyhow, so this is Isha Upanishad, which is one of the most. It's a very small Upanishad actually, but it's a very important Upanishad. The first verse of it itself is so important that the first verse says that Isha Vasamidam Sarvam, means whatever is changing in this ever-changing world, it is being contained by the Lord, that is Isha, which means that basically the Lord, or the Brahma, which Isha Upanishad keeps explaining, is basically everywhere. So that is the Upanishad is basically very important. Vedic Upanishad, or rather, its text is important. So we jump to the ninth verse of Isha Upanishad. It reads. I'll just first read the Upanishad, and then I will tell you what it means. What is the accepted meaning of the Upanishad? And then I will tell you what the controversy about these three verses are. Why these verses are so much discussed, and why it is relevant for me to make this video. So the ninth verse of Isha Upanishad says like this: Andham tamha pravishanti ye avidyam upasate tato bhuya iva te tamo yau vidyayam rataha. So I'm not a very good Sanskrit reader, but anyhow, so what exactly it says is that they enter into blinding darkness who worship avidya, into still greater darkness, as it were, do they enter who delight in vidya. Now, this is here. I'm going to explain to you exactly in more detail what exactly it means. But here, this is actually, even today, it's a very controversial word. The first statement, which is andham tamah pravishanti, means what? Tamaha means it's darkness. So andham is so those who are worshipping avidya, that is, who are ignorant. Avidya is ignorance. So those who are ignorant, or they are not knowledgeable at all, basically they will not make the right decisions, and they will basically descend into darkness. So this first one makes absolute sense. Absolute means there's no doubt at all about it. Now this second is where the problem comes. Here, the second one is what? Those who delight in vidya descend into greater darkness. Here, everybody gets confused. What exactly is this particular verse trying to say? These are Vedic verses, so these are very sacred, and because this is so confusing or disturbing, there have been multiple attempts to explain this. So there are multiple commentaries on these Upanishads. So there's a commentary by Shankaracharya, Ramana Maharshi. There's a commentary by Swamy Vivekananda. So all these scholars have tried their best to try to explain what exactly this particular verse is trying to say. So this verse is basically saying that a person who is worshipping avidya is going into darkness, but a person who is worshipping or delighting in vidya is also going into darkness. So this is absolutely confusing for people. So people, these scholars keep saying that there is something problematic about these verses. We don't understand the depth or the greater meaning of these verses. So they keep on saying that avidya and vidya, we have to take them not at face value. So avidya is what? Ignorance, and vidya is what? Knowledge. So a person who has ignorance will go into darkness, but a person who has knowledge, how can that person go into even still greater darkness? Means what? That means that a person who has knowledge is in a worse state than the one who doesn't have any knowledge, which is really. So now this Isha Upanishad is basically telling us about the status of Brahman. So what is Brahma, and what is where and how and what all. So importance of Brahman, the knowledge of Brahman. So they keep saying that so Vidya and Avidya, you have to stick to that. That is only the knowledge of Brahman and all that. But they still know that there is something lacking here. What exactly is the verse trying to tell us? Why will the person who delights in knowledge go into further stark darkness? Now, when I came to know this verse, somehow I realized that this verse, um, you don't need to completely change the meaning of Vidya and Avidya, and it makes perfect sense to me exactly the way it is. And I'll explain to you why it is. So a person, I'll just explain again. A person who worships avidya, that is ignorance, a person who is ignorant descends into darkness. But a person who is delighting in vidya, or a person who is worshipping vidya, will also go into darkness. That's what the verse says. Now I'm going to explain to you why and how the verse makes perfect sense the way it is, by understanding, by applying the knowledge in this book. Okay, so the second verse, that is the 10th verse, is what? Anya devahu vidyaya, anya dahur vidyaya, iti shushrum dhiranam yenasta dvi chachakshire. Now, whatever it is, but what it means is that one result they say is obtained by vidya, and another result they say is obtained by avidya. Thus, have we heard from the wise ones who explained it to us? So, anya, this what? Different anya. So, avidya, you get a different result, and vidya, you get a different result. And this is what the wise sages have taught us. So basically, if there is a particular topic, and you have ignorance of that particular topic, then you will choose something different. But if you have a knowledge about certain topic, then you will choose a different thing. So a typical example is what? Okay, if you're completely ignorant, then you will choose cigarette smoking. You don't know what is a cancer and what is asthma or what is chronic bronchitis and all that. But if you are a doctor and you know all that, then your knowledge is better. So you will choose a different thing. So you will choose not to do smoking. So it makes a lot of sense. This verse is, it makes a lot of sense that a person who has knowledge will choose differently. A person who does not have knowledge will choose differently. So we will basically go into a different path if we have knowledge, and we'll go into a different path if we don't have knowledge. So this is simple, and this makes a lot of sense. So there's no controversy in this verse. So the main controversial thing is the first verse, basically, that is the 9th verse. But to understand the 9th verse, it makes a lot of sense, even if we interpret the way I am trying to interpret. So one result they say is obtained by vidya, and another result is obtained by avidya. Thus have we heard from the wise ones who explained it to us. So this is the 11th verse and the final verse. Vidyam cha avidyam cha yastad dvedobhyasah avidyaya mrutyum tirtvam amrutam munchyate. What that means is what? He who knows both vidya and avidya together overcomes death through avidya and experiences immortality by means of vidya. So this is again a bombshell verse, or a bouncer verse, because nobody understands what exactly this verse is trying to tell. So a person who understands this particular the problem comes is because vidya and avidya are basically thought of as mutually exclusive. So if you have vidya of a particular thing, you cannot have avidya of the same particular thing. So if you know the table of 4, then you have knowledge about table of 4. So the avidya, or the ignorance of the table of 4, is gone. basically. As soon as Vidya comes, Avidya goes away. That's what was the understanding basically. That is the reason why this verse is very controversial or confusing. So a lot of people were not able to understand this. That a person who has Vidya and a person who takes into account both Vidya and Avidya together overcomes death through Avidya and experiences immortality by means of Vidya. Now, the problem with this verse is what? Um, the interpretation of what Vidya and Avidya are. Um, that is the reason why the ninth verse and the 11th verse are extremely controversial, and they have created a lot of different commentaries. And I'm not going to go into detail of what commentaries people have suggested and all, but a lot of to do with what exactly is Brahman and what Avidya is and what Vidya is, and what is the interpretation of all that. So anyhow, so what is my interpretation? I'm going to tell you. This is whatever I have told you till now is the interpretation of the usual interpretation, or the what exactly um, is the given interpretation. So now I'm going to tell you what exactly I mean by these verses and why exactly this makes perfect sense to me. The first verse and the third verse are not at all controversial. So for that, I would want to revise a few things. That there is in this book basically a lot of things are given about cognitive biases. Cognitive biases are what human tendencies basically. So humans have biases, or they have tendencies. So they in every moment a person has to keep making choices. So what choices they make it depends on what beliefs they have. So if they have beliefs these beliefs influence their choices. So that bias towards one particular choice rather than the other is called as cognitive biases. So there are so many cognitive biases. A lot of them have been described. In fact, more than 100 have been described, and they're extremely common. Almost 100%. Every person has some cognitive bias or the other. Most common of them is belief bias, but others like confirmation bias and congruence bias. And so there is one more bias which is very interesting bias. It's called as a self-serving bias, which is what it is a bias in our mind which makes us believe that we have to maintain our self-esteem. Means what? Any particular object or thing which is harming the self-esteem of an individual will excite this self-serving bias, and it will basically provoke anger. So people who have very high self-serving bias, now there is in Vedic literature, this self-serving bias is basically called as aham or ahankar. So a person who has very high self-serving bias or ahankar will basically be angry very easily, because if you criticize him even a bit, to say that you are wrong in this particular thing, I disagree with you, he will get rattled or irritated, and he will get angry, and he will start protesting. Why? Because his self-serving bias is coming into play. Another very important, very interesting cognitive bias is the Dunning-Kruger effect. Now, this Dunning-Kruger effect um, is it's wrongly basically attributed to people who are stupid. But the real thing is that it is a extremely common cognitive bias, and it is basically, I think, 100% of humans have Dunning-Kruger effect at some point of time in their lives. So it's very common. Now, what exactly is Dunning-Kruger effect? It is basically a tendency of an individual to overestimate one's own knowledge. So a person might overestimate that I know this, or I know, and this tendency of overestimation of one's own knowledge is extremely common. And I can give you a lot of examples about it, a lot of them. So this to better understand that, I'll just explain to you three more important concepts before I can explain the verses as well. So there is something called as a tunnel vision. Now, this vision is not basically the vision of our eyes, it is a vision of our mind. So, it's basically, you can imagine that our mind has an eye. So, whatever we know or whatever is our knowledge, that part our mind can see, and whatever we don't have any knowledge of, that our mind won't be able to see. So if I am not very good at mathematics or integration or all that, so then my mind won't be very good at, so it won't be able to see the integration part. If a particular person is good at taxation, so he will know all those taxation. But if the same person is asked about something about psychology or something about medicine, so he won't be able to know, because his mind is not able to see that part. So so you can understand that there is no individual who has a knowledge which is available all throughout. So if if one particular person has good amount of knowledge in one subject, the other person will have good amount of knowledge in some other subject. So is invariably every person, every individual, irrespective of who he is, whether he is a Nobel laureate or he has 1,000 publications or he has a PhD in something, he will be good at one particular thing and he will be very very bad at the other. So people think that Dunning-Kruger effect is only for the stupid, but actually speaking, stupid itself is a um, very subjective term. So you can prove anybody stupid by asking them questions which they have no knowledge of. So if I am a physicist and somebody asks me questions about genetics, so I have no idea about genetics. So the same way, if you ask a geneticist about extremely complicated string theory of physics, they will not have any idea. So they will feel stupid. So you can prove anybody stupid, except that if they start answering a lot of questions even though they don't know, that is basically Dunning-Kruger effect. If they accept, "Okay, nahi, Baba, I don't know," you know you are right that I am stupid as far as the genetics is concerned. I don't know anything about genetics. So that physicist is not basically having a Dunning-Kruger effect because he knows his limitations. So there's this pan knowledgeability universe or pan knowledgeability paper. This is a conceptual idea which is very interesting and which very it's a very interesting idea which is good to understand this particular concept of tunnel vision. If you understand, there are actually three types of tunnel vision, um, which are described in this book. One is spatial tunnel vision, one is temporal tunnel vision, and one is tunnel vision because of lack of knowledge. So basically, if I am sitting in this room in India and I can't see anything outside, so whatever is happening outside is basically tunnel vision for my mind, which you cannot see that. So it's invisible to us. Similarly, if I'm sitting in India, then what is happening in Australia, what is happening in Sydney, what is happening in New York, I have tunnel vision for that. So I can't see that. Similarly, tunnel vision, temporal tunnel vision is what I'm in 2022. So I know what is happening in and around the world in 2022. But what had happened in 1900s or 1800s or 1700s, that is basically in the past. So I was not living at that time. So I have a tunnel vision about that the things which are happening in the past. We don't need to go so much into uh, the past basically. So if you have a mobile phone, so the mobile phone you have just purchased it, but you know that the mobile phone is here. But what is the past of the mobile phone? What was there? Where was there? In which shop it was? And then from which factory it came? How it came? And then how it was made in the factory. So all these things are the past of the mobile. So you are not aware of that. So you have a temporal tunnel vision. That is, you know that mobile is here, but you don't know the past of the mobile. So that past is your mind is completely unaware of it. Similar way in the future also. Let's say you are eating a pork, or you are eating beef, or you are eating some red meat or whatever meat. So you know that it is there in your plate and you have eaten it and you can taste it for a few minutes. After that, what happens in the future? That pork or that meat, what exactly happens to it? How it gets absorbed? How it goes into the blood? What exactly changes it makes? What bacteria it supports? All that is future of the pork. So future you don't know. Basically, you know only the present state where you are eating the pork. So what changes it is going to happen, make into your body, whether it is going to get converted into fat, it will get converted into uric acid, it will get converted into cancer, it will get converted into, it will cause bacterial infection, or whatever. So you are not aware of that, which means that you have temporal tunnel vision. So tunnel vision of the third one is the tunnel vision of lack of knowledge. So I am not a Vedacharya, so I don't know what exactly the Vedas say. So from that point of view, I have tunnel vision about lack of knowledge of Vedas. Similarly, I am a doctor, but I have very little knowledge about mathematics, very complex mathematics or string theory. I am not aware. Similarly, I am not aware about taxation. I am not aware about politics. I am not aware about a lot of history and all that. So in a similar manner, every person has some lacunae. So their mind is not aware of those things. So I have so you can imagine a universe, basically, universe of pan knowledgeability, which is basically having containing entire knowledge, whatever is there, the entire knowledge is there in that universe of pan knowledgeability. So basically, your mind's eye, if you are pan knowledgeable, you can see every part of that universe. But if you are human, then only some parts you can see. So there is a galaxy for psychology. There is one galaxy for some medicine. There is one galaxy for politics. One galaxy for what I know. One galaxy for what I don't know. So this is basically all knowledge. So one galaxy is for my misconceptions about others and about myself and all that. So okay, so if I choose one particular subject, so there is galaxy amount of knowledge about that particular subject. Let's say psychology. So Mr. P has a basically he wants to collect small amount of knowledge about psychology. So actually speaking, the amount of psychology which he is supposed to know is a galaxy worth. But what he is going to have is a very small amount of knowledge, isn't it? So if he buys a book and he reads the book, so whatever small amount of knowledge that is there in that book, he will collect. So what we are basically collecting are the small sand grains of knowledge. So a person who is expert in it will have much more knowledge. But actually, even then, even if they are expert, they will have a moon of knowledge. But the whatever amount of galaxy of knowledge which is actually there for that particular subject, he doesn't know. So even if he is a genius in one particular subject, he has a moon of knowledge. But the person who is ignorant about it, he has sand grain of knowledge or even no knowledge. So he has no knowledge about that particular subject. But so that's how you can understand the universe of pan knowledgeability. You can also imagine a paper, pan knowledgeability paper. You can just see it like that. So this is an infinite paper. So it has infinite length, infinite breadth, and every person can see only a small part of the paper. So the other paper, whatever is written in that, it is blank basically. So you cannot see everything. So here one particular Mr. A is there. So he can see only small parts of. So each section is one particular subject, and you can see only small parts. All those circles are the only things which he can see. The rest of it he's not able to see. So it's like if you ask a question to another person, and if he's not knowing the answer, so he doesn't know that part. So he has no knowledge about that part. So that part goes into ignorance. So the you can understand that whatever small zeros, small areas are there, which the person's mind can see, you can call them as Vidya. And the person, the thing which you cannot see, you can call it as ignorance or avidya. So a person has to have an understanding about what is his vidya and what is his avidya, what is his ignorance. Means if I say that I am a surgeon, uh, but I cannot do each and every surgery. So there are some parts of the um, subject of surgery which I don't know. So I have to have an understanding that I can do these surgeries, I cannot do these surgeries. If I have a overestimation that I can do all surgeries, and I keep doing surgeries which I am actually not skilled at doing, so I will have more complications, or I'll have more problems. So in a similar manner, so you have to have an understanding of what you know, what you are having knowledge of, and what you don't know, or what you are deficient in knowledge of. So if you have that understanding that I know these things and I don't know these things, and that is a ideal scenario. But if you are saying that I know all these things, but I don't know, there's nothing which I don't know, that is a scenario in which, you know, so I basically cannot be wrong basically. So whatever I am saying is right. So whatever everybody else is saying is wrong. So whatever knowledge I have the moon of knowledge, but the other people's moons are bad. So I'll explain to you what exactly this means. So this pan knowledgeability paper is important. So in this particular Mr. A, what happens is that he has a very small amount of knowledge about Hollywood and psychology and ecology and climate change. So he has very little no knowledge about climate change. So if you ask him some question about climate change, he'll be a stupid basically. So if he accepts that yes, I don't know anything about climate change, then it's okay. But if he has an extreme uh, belief about climate change. So he is saying like, no, I believe like this is it, and that's fine. So that means what? He has a strict opinion or strict belief about climate change, and he will keep taking um, decisions based on that. But actually, the reality is that he has no knowledge about the climate change, and basically um, he has ignorance about climate change, and he is basically not taking basically not acknowledging his own ignorance, which means what? He's having a Dunning-Kruger effect. I can give you a lot of examples actually. So book buying. So if you think that you are going to a shop and you're trying to buy a book, so it's a very difficult thing actually, because you will have a limited amount of time and limited amount of budget. But anyhow, you come across this book or any other book, and you see the subject, decoding psyche. I don't know. I don't want to read psychology. I'm not interested. And this particular author is also not very interesting. And this book is this the cover is also not interesting. So I will not buy that. I will buy something else. Oh, this author looks good actually. This cover also looks good. So what we are basically doing is we are judging the book by its cover, by its author's name, or by its cover, or whatever. So this book may be actually a gem, and it may have a lot of information which you can use in your day-to-day life. But within a few 30 seconds time, you have basically decided that this particular subject is useless to you. Because basically, when you have decided this, basically you have assumed that you know everything that is written in this book, and you have taken a decision. So this decision is very high likelihood that it is wrong, because a lot of information is given in this book. If you read that book, that will be really helpful to you. But you have taken that decision that yeah, this book is useless because I know that this book is useless because this author. So basically, is not known. So I'll buy some book which is from a known author. So this is basically a typical example of Dunning-Kruger effect, because you are overestimating your knowledge about the book. So you have judged the book by its cover. That is, you have no idea what uh, knowledge is written in that book, and still you have assumed that that book is not good for you, or maybe some another book. I'm not talking about only this book, but basically buying book buying or yeah. So Katha Upanishad, like Kane Upanishad is one of the Upanishads which says that a person who is no he knows, he thinks that he knows Brahman, actually doesn't know Brahman, and the person who Brahman is actually Brahma. So it is the N is silent actually in the real thing. Brahma, it's called as Brahma. So a person who Brahma is the universal, omniscient, omnipresent deity in Hinduism, which is basically supposed to pervade the entire universe. So it's basically the universe. The universe itself is Brahman. Brahman is the universe, and the universe is made up of Brahman. Every part is moving. Every corner of the universe is Brahma. So this Brahma is basically the person who thinks that he knows Brahman actually doesn't know Brahman, and a person thinks that he doesn't know Brahman knows Brahman. Why? Because he knows that I know only a small part of the Brahman, so I am in complete ignorance of the other parts of the Brahman, which means what? That he has an acknowledgement about his own ignorance. So yeah, so there are some believers of God. Let's say there is a believer of God who thinks that the God is one particular way. Like a God is having only 4 heads and 20 hands and 5 eyes, and this is the description of the God. So he believes that this is the God. So he thinks that God is like this. So if someone tells him that no, God is not like this. God has only 2 eyes and he has 4 legs, 2 legs and 2 hands. So he gets annoyed. He says, no, I think that God is only this. There can be no other God. Which means what? That he is basically believing one particular type of God, and he thinks that God is only that much. So any other description of God is wrong. So this is basically what he is basically assuming that he knows everything about God, and he is basically disregarding his ignorance. He has extreme amount of ignorance about other aspects of God. But if God exists, of course. So even the atheist people, they are saying like, yes, I know everything about God. There is no God. There is no evidence of God anywhere in the whole universe. So basically, this is a very stubborn way of saying that I know everything about the universe, and I know all the rules of the universe. I know the physical laws of the universe, and there is absolutely no evidence of God. This is basically overestimation of one's knowledge. Why? Because the reality is that they have very little evidence about. So they are basically living in a very small planet, which is very small, tiny dust, mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. So the amount of knowledge which they have is very little. So if we know that there is evidence of God in the other corner of the universe, we don't know, isn't it? So basically they are not taking into account of the ignorance of the God. So believers of the God who are very firm, and they don't want to. So they have given some definition of God, and they want to stick to that definition. And any person who disagrees with them, they hate that guy, and they want to challenge and get angry about every other believer. So it all also depends on the name of the God. So if a person thinks that only Allah is the God, or only Jesus is the God, or only Ram is the God, there's no other God. So Shiva is not there, only Ram is there. All these are believers of God who are trying to force their deity or God onto others. Which means what? They are basically completely ignoring their own ignorance. That is, they think that they know much more than they actually know. Which means that they are having something called as Dunning-Kruger effect, which is what? They're overestimating their own knowledge. So they have a knowledge, but they have a lack of acknowledgement of their avidya. So they have avidya and they are not acknowledging it. So they have vidya, but they're not acknowledging their avidya, which is the first word and the verse and the third verse. So essentially, yeah. So for them, what is it is my way or the highway. So there is no other way the God can be, or rather, this is not exactly only related to religion. It is basically any other thing. Like if there's a scientist and he says that my research says that this is the truth. Now, in that, your research says like this, but there are some other researchers who might suggest something different. So you have to take into account all of them. So you cannot just think that only my research is good. I'll give some examples of that. Very, very interesting examples of there are there. So there is one NASA researcher called as Nadine Angar. She's a NASA researcher, and she's basically she says that she became famous recently when she gave a New York Times article in which she said that plants are actually, when they are stressed or distressed, when they have less water, they will release something called as VOCs, or volatile organic compounds. Yes, these are sulfur based compounds which are basically a signal to the nature that we want water. So these are, according to her, pollutants. So she says that plants are basically polluting our this thing. So she further says that I don't know whether this is politically motivated or not, because this is basically a lot of these scientists are left leaning, and they are like so they want to prove that climate science is right, and climate science says that nature is not the right answer for. So anyhow, so she in her article, New York Times article, she wrote that it is a waste of time to plant trees. So you should not plant trees. So this was very arrogant. So she's like relentless. She just doesn't want to relent. She doesn't want to retreat. She's just like, I am right. My research is right. Her arguments were they were discussed, and they were a lot of people said the arguments were debunked by a lot of other scientists who said that biodiversity is important, and putting trees and ecology and ecosystems and cycles of nature are extremely important, and you cannot completely ignore them. You cannot completely ignore the biodiversity crisis and extinction crisis. So this particular scientist, one of the examples, Nadine. So okay, and then there are some other scientists like solar scientists, or there are many other actually examples which I have given. There is one Ivar Geiger, a Norwegian American physicist, Nobel Prize winner, kept on climate contrarian views. Then there is one Professor Willie Soon. He was again a solar scientist. He kept on saying that there is no evidence of warming. Professor Lindzen is there, insisting that IPCC is scaremongering. There's one Habibullo Admusatao. He is an American researcher. He kept on saying that other planets are also warming. So basically, these are deniers. Basically, so they keep on saying that what I have researched is right. So the other people, the other scientists who have developed climate models, and all those people are stupid. So they don't want to consider their research. They want to consider only their research is right, and other people's research is right. So there are some solar scientists like Michael Lockwood, and Valentina Zarkova. They keep insisting that the sun is going into a prolonged grand solar minimum. So it's not the climate change which is going to happen, but it's going to be, in fact, a grand solar minimum or ice age which is going to happen. over a period of time. So it's not basically going to keep heating, but it's going to cool down. There's one something called as Heartland Institute, which is made up of a lot of climate change deniers. So this is basically again politically motivated. So right-wing people go into the climate Heartland Institute and they keep on denying climate change. There this thing is that what we know, our knowledge is right, but our ignorance is I know everything. So my ignorance, they are basically uh, worshipping their knowledge, and they are basically completely ignoring their um, their ignorance, or they are not knowing some things, but they are ignoring that part. So they are not acknowledging their ignorance. So it makes a lot of sense that that so here again the second verse is very interesting, that in each of these scenarios, actually the person who has ignorance will choose a different path, and a person who has a knowledge will choose a different path. So if a person who is accepting climate science, he will choose a less GHG emissions bias, GHG emissions option. But if a person is ignorant about climate science, then he will not, he will continue to use coal, or he will. So, but climate science itself is a very extreme example of Dunning-Kruger effect. This particular example, why exactly is because climate change scientists are high in self-serving bias, so they don't want to discuss at all. They don't want to have any argument, because they are of the opinion that any person who is trying to discuss climate science is basically trying to save uh, the petroleum industry, and trying to delay GHG emissions, cut down on GHG emissions, which means what, that they are basically not open for questioning. So they are completely ignorant of the fact that there's biodiversity crisis, and there is extinction crisis, and there is insect apocalypse, and that there is a unprecedented amount of habitat destruction. So habitat destruction is useless for them. So it's not of any use. So a person who is basically ecologist, or a person who is more into biology and more into these cycles, that person's knowledge is useless. There, it's of no use. What their knowledge about climate science and physics of climate science is very, very important. But the person who is saying to them that there is a biodiversity crisis also going on, so we are basically chopping off a lot of trees, so we should plant more trees. No, we should chop more trees because we want to reduce we want to increase the number of wooden houses, and we want to build big wooden skyscrapers. So if we are chopping off the trees because of that, we are okay, we will replant the trees. What is there? What if the biodiversity goes? That doesn't matter. What we want is to replace fossil fuels by biological crops. So if that further increases the habitat destruction, it makes it's okay. So if a person who knows climate science, he will take these particular options, like they will keep chopping trees, and he will keep building more and more wooden skyscrapers, because he is basically ignorant about the biodiversity crisis. But the person who knows biodiversity crisis as well as climate science, he knows, yes, climate science I'm a bit less aware of, but so if the climate scientist acknowledge that yes, their ignorance, there is ignorance about their knowledge about biodiversity crisis, so they don't know much about biodiversity crisis, then they will lead the world in a positive direction. But if they are stubborn, they are not taking into account about the knowledge of other people, other scientists, like the people who know more about the biodiversity crisis. So if their knowledge is not taken into consideration, and climate science will keep saying, no, we are right, you are wrong. Biodiversity crisis is useless, and we are not going to plant trees. We are going to keep chopping more trees for more wood and more wooden skyscrapers and more roads and more railways and more biological crops and more solar farm. So we are going to keep removing nuclear, and we are going to put more and more solar. So this basically climate science is completely ignorant about the ecosystems destruction and biodiversity crisis, which means that climate science itself is not taking into consideration their own ignorance. So they are not acknowledging their ignorance of this part, which means that even climate science is a good example of the same. So so you can understand that he who knows both Vidya and Avidya together overcomes death and experiences immortality, which is basically you can interpret it in this manner that whenever you are into some particular subject, you have to understand what you know and what you don't know. So your avidya and vidya, both you have to take into account. If you are taking into account only avidya, you are ignorant person. So you will try to find out someone else who is more knowledgeable, and you will try to follow that person. And that's why you are basically going to go into darkness yourselves. But if you are not taking into acknowledgement your own ignorance, and you are going to worship your vidya, that is, you know one particular thing, but you don't know other things, and you don't accept that, you acknowledge that you have ignorance about others, you are going to lead the entire world, other ignorant people also along with you. Like the climate science people are basically leading others into darkness. I'm not saying that the climate science is wrong, or I'm not a denier of climate science, but they have to also take into account the biodiversity crisis and there are some very interesting things like virtual emissions, which we have to take into consideration. Which means that agriculture, concretization, and deforestation are much more important than release of GHG emissions. Which means what? That the whole human population is responsible for climate change and increase in CO2, and not just fossil fuel industry, which accounts for very little of virtual emissions. So virtual emissions is something which they are completely ignoring, or they don't have any idea about, and they don't want to discuss that. Which means what? They are ignorant about it, and they don't want to acknowledge the ignorance of it. Which means that they are leading the entire world into darkness. So thank you very much for listening, and I think you should share and subscribe. And thank you very much. You listen to other psychology videos as well, and have a nice day.